I think of a big package because this is going to be a key well. People have talked about coring. I thought, well, yeah, but why don't we run some of these? So, but we do have the logs then at the Kansas Geological Society as well as a survey. There's so much you can look at that other people have done. Whoops. This shows kind of an image then. This comes from advertising literature in the old days of what's going on then. We got the arms, typically 4 of them. Here again you can see the buttons, each recording a micro-resistivity. And then here we have a concept of what it would look like if you could see it at the surface. And then we have the image itself. Notice that they're putting not just simply white to black range, they throw in some yellows and oranges. But those are simply artificial in that usually we can discriminate things a lot better if we have a little bit of color added. So really it would go from white to yellow to brown to black. Okay, here's an image right here, and this is of the Morrow sandstone. So we're going to look at a sandstone. This was run for Oxy. In fact, I asked Oxy why they ran it, and they said, well, actually, they didn't pay for it. Back in those days, it was run as a sweetener in the hopes that they'd run more FMI tools. That's why they did it here. Now, we look at the Morrow, and here's our gamma ray log. And we see a shale down here. Here's the main sandstone up here, and here's the upper part of the Morrow grading the shale above. Now, the image you're looking at here, that is this part right here. So fundamentally at the bottom, we got it whiting out. That is simply a tight limestone. That corresponds to this feature here that's being averaged out. That's right at the top of the Morrow. And then we get into this feature here. That corresponds to that. So again, this is how the gamma ray is averaging, but once we see in detail, we can see a lot of structure. So this is interpretation. I didn't make this interpretation. I had a sedimentologist said, okay, interpret concretion, cut-and fill, shaly sandstone, heterolithic bedding, bioturbated. You can see all sorts of structure there. What do you think might be a starved ripple? Possibly even pyrite crystals here. Naturally, if you have anything like pyrite that conducts like crazy, so you'll see a black blob, but these are actually coming out square blobs. Is that simply a pixel artifact, or is it the real deal? Might be pyrite. Then as we go up, we can see that actually it's starting to shale up a bit because, again, the brighter colors mean it's more resistive, less shale, and it's getting shalier towards the top. And actually, maybe you can see it here or in your manual, we can actually see some burrows show up here. So we can even see fossils if you think of burrows being there. So this sequence here, these interbedded sandstones and shales, they're simply getting averaged out then on this upper part of the image. This is the reason why the FMI is run extensively if you're in offshore Gulf of Mexico, or if you're offshore West Africa, where a lot of their production is coming from exceedingly thin sandstone intervals. And looking at a gamma ray log or the other logs, they simply get averaged out. But by running the FMI, you can actually see the thin interbeds that could constitute pay. So in classic successions then, you certainly look then to break out where your thin interbedded material is. In carbonates, very commonly, looking for fractures. Now again, we've got the same thing then, that where you see the image, that is where the pad is pressed up against the borehole wall. Where you see the white, that is simply between the pads. Now we look at the top, we see image orientation 0, that's north, 180 degrees, that's south, 360 then we're back to north again. So the image you look at then is the borehole wall, but it's been crushed into a plane. So that will mean then that any feature that we see crossing it, a plane, will show up then as kind of a sinusoid. Try it sometime. Crush something that's in a cylinder into a plane, and you'll see then that any dipping feature then comes out as a sinusoid. Where the upper part of the sinusoid is saying that's the up dip, and the bottom end is showing where it's dipping to. If we have a horizontal bed, then it'll come as a straight line. A dipping bed, though, will show a sinusoid, and the more accentuated that sinusoid is, then the steeper the dip. So we can see then that even though this is a souped up dip meter, it's still retaining one of its features. In this case, computer processing then has simply gone through to evaluate then where the dips and strikes of conductive features seem to be across that borehole wall. So anyhow, that's an example of what it would look like in a sandstone. And here's what it looked like in outcrop. Morrow sandstone, here we are in Morrow, Arkansas. So what we saw then is equivalent to these thin sandstone beds, and we can see some burrows on the undersurface here. So shales interbedded with sandstones and quite extensively burrowed. Here's another example. This is part, I think, of a master's thesis written by Adam DeVries. I think he did this out of Oklahoma State, but this is from Kansas. So this is from a Kansas well, which is kind of cool because they cored it and they did imaging. And so, you know, the master student slaved on this to actually photograph the core and lay it out as I think. So what you're looking here then is the core image, if you like, optically. And over here you have what it looks like in the subsurface. So this gives tremendous opportunity then, once again, then to relate geology as seen in a core with geology as you see in the subsurface. So yet again, shales are going to show darker colors, black or very dark brown. We see some shales showing up here. And furthermore, as we work within the sandstone, where it is the brighter colors, in this case the whites, that is indicating a kind of less shale, maybe lower porosity. As we go upwards, is going to more shaly horizons there. So even though this is an electrical image, there's a tremendous amount of information. In some cases you can see more on the image than you can actually within the core itself. Yep.
Now that seems to indicate less of the white vertical stripes, so does that mean there's more pad in contact with?
Correct, correct. Because as they move on, they're trying to improve the technology all the time. So the older devices, as I say, were just literally your good old four-arm dip meter, in which case it didn't matter about whether you had something missing.
Must be 6 or 8 arms?
Yeah. And also they try to overlay them so they're staggered.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to have a complete pad, they slightly offset them, and that way you can get almost 360-degree coverage. Furthermore, although a lot of the things we're seeing here at Schlumberger, everybody, well not everybody, a lot of companies are doing imaging and doing competitively as well. So even though we're talking about exotic logs, and I said expensive logs, there's a lot of competition out there. So you can get some of these done. But again, you have to say, why am I doing this again? You know, you have to see how I can relate it. Here's an example from the Arbuckle. So this comes from actually a waste disposal well. I'm finding out a lot that if I want to get every log known to human beings, go to a disposal well. I assume the reason for that is people don't want to get sued, right? So that way if you're drilling a well, you say, run anything we've got. And then later on, if people start to say, oh, you guys never looked at this or that, saying, well, we ran every log known. Because this one here then is showing there's an image. It's not an exploration well, it's not a production well, but here we are, we're over in Finney County. We're looking at the Arbuckle, and you can see these kind of alarming sine wave things that tell us that there's strong dips. The reality is that this was drilled about 35 degrees in the vertical, so it's inclined borehole. But recall again then that when the dips actually come out here, they will be corrected then for the inclination of the borehole and the azimuth. So we're actually looking at two sets of dips. These dips here are corresponding to those broad bands which are corresponding to lithology dips, if you like. On the other hand, these dips here, they are relating to the fracture features picked up within the borehole. So let's look at the bedding features, and we see this kind of stuff. Here's a brown band there and a brown band there. We're looking at cyclic deposits. These are the more conductive, probably more shaly. I'd have to go and look at the gamma ray to check this out, to make sure, but that's fundamentally shaly at intervals there. Also notice the kind of leopard spot pattern you're picking up within there. So you're picking up lots of vugs. So here's another instance then, what Richard was talking about this morning, the vugs with the Arbuckle. Now you can actually see them developing here.